Good day, everyone. We are the Group 8, and we are going to present to you the continuation of Project Time Management. I am Sandra Giselle D.A. Santos, and I am going to present to you the sequence activities. Without further ado, let us start. So, what is sequence activities? Sequence activities is the process of identifying and documenting relationships among the project activities. The key benefit of this process is that it defines the logical sequence of work to obtain the greatest efficiency, given all project constraints. The input, tools and techniques, and output of sequence activities are depicted in this figure. So first, let us discuss the input. One of the inputs is what we call schedule management plan. It identifies the scheduling method and tool to be used for the project, which will guide how the activities may be sequenced. The next one is called activity list. The activity list is a comprehensive list including all scheduled activities required by the project. The activity list includes the activity identifier and a scope of work description for each activity in sufficient detail to ensure the project team members understand what work is required to be completed. Moving on, activity attributes extend a description of the activity by identifying the components associated with each one. The components for each activity evolve over time. It's often used to identify the person responsible for executing the work, where the work will be performed, and the activity type. They are used for schedule development for selecting, ordering, and sorting the planned scheduled activities in various ways within reports. The next one is called milestone list. A milestone is a significant point or event in the project. A milestone list identifies all milestones, meaning it represents moment in time wherein the team members have achieved an important event for the project, and it indicates whether it is mandatory, such as those required by contract, or optional. This list it is used to monitor the progress of the project. Next one is what we call the project scope statement. It contains the product scope description, which includes product characteristics that may affect activity sequencing, such as the physical layout of a plan to be constructed or subsystem interfaces on a software project. Next is the Enterprise Environmental Factors or EEF. Enterprise Environmental Factors refers to an input or output mechanism that is supposed to identify factors that cannot be controlled by the project team but have a significant impact on how the project must be managed or on the outcome of the project, program, or portfolio. There are four major enterprise environmental factors. These are organizational culture, structure, and governance, government or industry standards, political climate, and marketplace conditions. So why is the EEF is important? Simply because that being aware of the EEF that may affect the project beforehand, that is crucial for project planning. You might anticipate any problem that may arise while processing the project. Thus, you may be able to counter these issues smoothly. And lastly is the Organizational Process Asset or OPA. Organizational Process Asset refers to all the implicit input or assets and processes used by an organization in operating their business. It refers to all the information that could be found in an organization's documentation. This helps to ease the management and processes of a project. There are three categories of OPA: processes, policies, and procedures, corporate knowledge base, team and SME knowledge. These are vital to the organization process to understand the team's capabilities, issues, knowledges, and procedures to do work. Now let us move on to the tools and techniques. The first tools and technique is what we call precedence diagramming method or PDM. It is a technique used for constructing a schedule model in which activities are represented by nodes and connects them with arrows to show the logical relationships that exist between them. This technique is also called activity on node or AON, and it is the method used by most software project management packages. In this figure, begin and end are both milestones. Activities A and B are not dependent on each other. Activity C is dependent on both A and B, which is shown as a circle. Many of the project planning software packages available use this method, which simply plots the tasks to be completed and connects them with arrows that show the dependencies. If an activity within diagram has only one arrow, then this represents an error and needs to be corrected. The precedence diagramming method uses four relationships, which are the finish to start or FS, finish to finish or FF, start to start or SS, and start to finish or SF. Let us dive in within finish to start. One activity must finish before another activity starts. This is the most common relationship in PDM. For example, to paint a wall, first you have to construct it. In this case, the first activity is building the wall and the second activity is painting. You cannot start painting the wall until the wall is ready or it is not yet finished. Next is finish to finish. One activity cannot finish until another activity is finished. Here, two activities may in fact run in parallel. However, the second activity is only able to entirely complete after the first activity is 100% done. For example, let us say that you are coding a program for a client. The client gives you the features after completing a milestone. You cannot finish coding until you get the client's complete requirements. Next is start to start. In this relationship, one activity cannot start until another activity starts. This relationship does not require that both activities begin simultaneously. For example, suppose you have to apply coating on a wall, but the wall must be cleaned in order to apply it. Therefore, one team will clean the wall and second team will coat it. It can start simultaneously or not as long as cleaning the wall is not yet finished. And lastly is start to finish. In this relationship, one activity must start before another can finish. Start to finish is the opposite of the finish to finish dependency. In a finish to finish relationship, the next task can only be finished once the predecessor task is 100% complete. In a start to finish relationship, the previous task can only be completed once the next task has commenced work. This relationship is rarely used. One good example is shifting of work. The shift of first security guard cannot finish until the shift of second security guard started. Second in the tools and techniques is dependency determination. Dependencies are defined as relationships among tasks that determine the sequence in which project management activities need to be performed. These tasks may be multiple preceding tasks, which means that two tasks can be applicable at the same time. The process of dependency determination requires the project manager or the project management team to determine them so that they can assign tasks to the team members and also inform the stakeholders. Moreover, it is easier to arrange the tasks if the dependencies are all identified. There are four types of dependencies in project management. These are the mandatory dependency, discretionary dependency, external dependency, and internal dependency. So first is the mandatory dependency. Mandatory dependency are either required by the law or contract, and sometimes they are inherent in the nature of the work. Due to this, the work must be done in a certain order. Mandatory dependencies often involve physical limitations and they are also called hard logic. For example, a floor of a building cannot be constructed until foundation is laid. Next is discretionary dependency. Discretionary dependency are defined by the project team as a certain order of activities is more suitable for the nature of work. Sometimes there is more than one way to define a sequence between two activities, but the project team decides to take one sequence over the other. They choose a particular sequence because of the best practices or lessons learned from prior experiences. These are also called soft logic. For example, the project team can develop either X first or Y first, but they decide to develop X first. Next is external dependency. External dependency are defined between the project activities and non-project activities. The project activities are done by the project team and the non-project activities are done by people who are external to the project team. Generally, the project team has no control over non-project activities and hence, the project schedule can be disrupted because of non-performance of non-project activities. For example, Project development cannot start until equipment is delivered. And lastly is the internal dependency. Internal dependency are defined between two project activities. Generally, the project team has complete control over the project activities. There is no involvement of any external party. For example, constructing a wall and painting a wall. Moving on to the last part of tools and techniques, which is the leads and lags. So first, let's talk about leads. Lead is the acceleration of a successor activity. In other words, the second activity can begin and be conducted in parallel to the first activity. For example, if the photo shoot is going to take 3 days and editing another 3 days, you can begin editing after the first day of the shoot. Next is lags. Lags is the delay of a successor activity and represents time that must pass before the second activity can begin. For example, after plastering the wall is complete, you need to wait for the cement to set before paint can be applied. Now let us move on to the outputs. First is the project schedule network diagrams. Project schedule network diagrams are schematic displays of the project schedule activities and the logical relationships among them. A project schedule network diagram can be produced manually or by using project management software. And lastly is the project document updates. Some processes will require updates, and this includes activity lists and milestone lists.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresita Valdez. Today's topic is about the estimate activity resources. So first, let's define resource. Resource is one of the essential tools for the project, and choosing the resource requirements leads to successful project management. Resources in project management includes facilities, people, materials, equipments, money, and any fundamental things that are necessary for the executing the project that you planned for. Before a project begins, the resources should be assessed and allocated because resources are needed throughout the entire life cycle of a project. It is important to determine the resource requirements for a successful management. The process of estimating the activity resources is a fundamental part of developing a project. So, what is estimate activity resources? Estimate activity resources is the process that estimates the type and the quantities of resources, like the materials, the human resources, the equipment or the supplies required to perform each activity. The key benefits of this process is that it identifies the type, the quantity, and the characteristic of the resources required to complete the project, which allows more accurate cost and duration estimates. In order to complete a project activity, you will need a performer of the task. For instance, a civil engineer for a construction project. Materials, just like cement, wood, etc., will be used during construction. The equipment that will also be used, such as a truck, cranes to lift and place the materials. For instance, how many construction workers, how many civil engineers you will need for the construction project, and the amount of the cement, steel, wood, etc. that will be used during the process are determined during the estimate activity resources process. The estimate activity resources process is closely coordinated with the estimate cost process. For example, you may have to hire a consultant to get knowledge about what is needed for a project activities. This consultant will have an additional cost to the project. So, now let's see the input, the tools and the techniques, and the output of the estimate activity resources process. So, there are 8 inputs that are used in the process of estimating activity resources. These are the schedule management plan, activity lists, activity attributes, resource calendars, risk register, activity cost estimates, enterprise environmental factor, and organizational process assets. And we have 5 tools and techniques that can be used to estimate the required activities resources. These are expert judgment, alternatives analysis, published estimating data, bottom-up estimation, and project management software. The resulting outputs from this process includes activity resource requirements, resource breakdown structure, and project documents updates. The first input into estimate activity resources process is the schedule management plan. It identifies the level of accuracy and the units of measure for the resources to be used. Schedule management plan will describe the approach of how the other processes of time management knowledge should perform. In this case, schedule management plan will provide methods of how to estimate activity resources and what is the level of accuracy of these resources estimations. The project schedule is the tool that communicates what work needs to be performed, which resources of the organization will perform the work, and the time frame in which the work needs to be performed. Although we have already seen that activity list is an important output of defined activities process, it is also an important input to the estimate activity resources process. Activity list contains the list of the activities that the project comprises of. The activity list also includes an activity identifier and a scope of work description for each activity to ensure that the project team members understand what work is required to be completed. Activity attributes. It provides the primary data input for use in estimating those resources required for each activity in the activity list. Activity attributes can be used to identify the person responsible for executing the work, geographic area or place where the work has to perform, project calendar the activity is assigned to, activity type of effort involved. The activity attributes are additional information about the activity, so whenever you use activity, you would also need the activity attributes to understand more about the activity. Resource calendars. A calendar for planning, managing, and monitoring resources, including both employees and equipment. It gives project manager an overview of how resources are being utilized, which resources are available and when. For example, a machine, a tool, or an architect required for the project is only available during the specific period of time. So in this case, the project should consider this resource constraint while estimating the resource requirements for the project. Risk register. Risk events may impact resource selection and availability. Risk register contains all the risks that are identified in the project to the point in time. In this context, if there are any risks associated with the resources, the project needs to consider those risks while planning those resources for the activities. Activity cost estimates includes the cost of resources that may impact the resource selection. This is developed during the cost management process. Cost estimate keep us within the boundary. Being able to know how much money we get to spend help us decide what quality of resources we can plan for. Enterprise environmental factors. The enterprise environmental factors that can influence the estimate activity resources process includes the following: resource location, resource availability, team resource skills, organizational culture, published estimating data, and marketplace conditions. Examples of why this may affect the resources required for an activity could be the laws and the regulation resulting in more or less work effort to carry out each activity, or the environment within which the activity is to take place. Organizational process assets. The organizational process assets that can influence the estimate activity resources process includes the following: the policies and procedures regarding staffing, the policies and the procedures relating to supplies and equipment, and historical information regarding the types of resources used for similar work on previous projects. In this process, you can refer to the Estimate Activity Resources process the data from the previous similar projects regarding the work effort for typical activities or procedures that are mandated to carry out particular activities. Tools and techniques. Expert judgment. People with the specialized knowledge in the resource planning and estimating can be used. Expert judgment means bringing in experts who have done this sort of work before and getting their opinions on what resources are needed. Alternative analysis, a technique used to evaluate identified options in order to select which options or approaches to use to execute and perform the work of the project. Alternative analysis means considering several different options for how you assign resources. This includes varying the number of resources as well as the kind of resources you use. Also, when a specific resources is not available, then the project may need to consider other best alternatives available which suits your project's needs. Publish estimating data. Several organizations will publish production rates and unit costs of resources for different countries or locations to get an array of labor trades, material, and equipment. Published estimating data is something that project managers in a lot of industries use to help them figure out how many resources they need. They rely on articles, books, journals, and periodicals that collect, analyze, and publish data from other people's projects. Bottom-up estimating, a method of estimating project duration or cost by aggregating the estimate of lower-level components of the work breakdown structure. Bottom-up estimating means breaking down complex activities into pieces and working out resource assignments for each piece. It is a process of estimating individual activities' resource need or cost and then adding these up together to come up with a total estimate. Project management software. The project management software like Microsoft Project can be useful to track how much resources is needed. Remember, these software tools cannot do all the work for the project manager. They are just a tool to help the project manager do their job. The output of estimating activity resources process include activity resource requirements. The main purpose of the activity resource estimating process is to determine the resource requirements for each activity, and therefore, this is the major output from this process. Activity resource requirements should specify following things primarily. What type of resources required for activity? How many of such resources required? The duration of each resource as per the need. And it should also document the justification or basis for resource estimation. Resource breakdown structure. The resource breakdown structure is a hierarchical representation of resources by category and type required to complete the scheduled activities of a project. Examples of resource categories include but are not limited to labor, material, equipment, and supplies. Resource type may include the skill level, grade level, required certifications, or other information as appropriate to the project. In planned resource management, the resource breakdown structure was used to guide the categorization for the project. In this process, it is a complete document that will be used to acquire and monitor resources. Project document updates. Documents that you may update include activity lists, activity attributes, and resource calendars. The identified types of required resources for an activity and the estimated quantity for each identified resources become attributes and must be added to the activity list. Activity resource estimating might generate modification to the activity list, and it may also cause you to change the resource calendar. That's all. Thank you for listening.